I wanted to introduce our honoree today, who, when I met him in person for the first time earlier this weekend, and he said something like, I want to know why me? And the question is an honest one and a worthy one. And the first thought I had was you, because we can't do our work if our patients aren't safe. And you have really allowed us to feel like there is more safety in the world. And one of the things that keeps coming up in programs over and over again has to do with how we exist in a world where, in some ways, phobia has been institutionalized. And one thing we know about phobia is that it's one of the more contagious of the difficulties that we face. Perhaps we could call it an illness if we weren't trying to learn to value it. But when it becomes institutionalized, it kind of results in this cycle of helplessness and retaliation. And we are very concerned about the location of our work in a system that often seems like it, the wheels of it turn through a cycle of institutional helplessness and retaliation. And I think one of the things that we have to thank you for, and I'll tell you why concretely, because I can read you some of Jim's list of accomplishments, although I came with 6 pages single-spaced that I could have said about him, and I won't do that to you because you'd rather hear him talk than hear his qualifications. But I think one of the things that you do is you give us some protection and some sense that we aren't helpless, and therefore we can make fear our friend enough to treat our patients well. So we are so grateful to you for allowing us to practice as best we can. And I want to tell you a little bit about, concretely, what our honoree Jim Gottstein has done to allow this to happen. He's been practicing law in Alaska since graduating from Harvard Law School in 1978. Informed by his self-described escape from being made permanently mentally ill by the mental health system after a breakdown in 1982, he has moved from practicing business law, mostly transactional, to almost exclusively focusing on patients' rights. When he read Mad in America in 2002, he viewed it as an extraordinary roadmap to challenge court-ordered psychiatric drugging on the grounds that it is not in the person's best interest. To pursue this, he co-founded the tax-exempt public interest law firm, Law Project for Psychiatric Rights, or PsychRights, to mount a strategic litigation campaign against forced psychiatric drugging and electroshock throughout the United States. Starting in 2004, as a result of the escalating harm done to children through psychiatric drugging, PsychRights adopted addressing that problem as a priority. Since founding PsychRights in 2002, he has won 4 Alaska Supreme Court cases which forced psychiatric drugging or involuntary commitment court procedures were found to be unconstitutional or otherwise illegal. In addition to litigating these issues, because he believes solutions must also be implemented, Jim was instrumental in launching Soteria Alaska, a non-coercive alternative to psychiatric hospitalizations, and Choices, Inc., a community-based program, both of which work with people who choose not to take psychiatric drugs. Mr. Jim Gottstein.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction, Nancy. I really appreciate it. I'm pleased to be here. Glad to see you all here. I thought I would pull out of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights a few provisions that I think are really applicable here. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted to him by the Constitution or by law. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And as I go through here, I may not be the best at pointing out each place where what's happening violates these principles, but I'll try and do that. But try and keep these principles in mind as I go through this material. So that's international law, and the United States is bound by that, as are basically all other countries that have signed on to it, which is basically everyone. And so what I'm going to talk about is primarily about United States law, but especially for those in other countries, you might think about how these, or from other countries, how these principles might apply in other countries. So one of the principles was people have the right to liberty. Okay, so the United States Supreme Court said, well, fundamental rights like that are not absolute. And so the question is, when is it constitutional to abridge them? And with respect to involuntary commitment, which I'm not going to talk about that much, but involuntary commitment, basically the U.S. Supreme Court says the one element is it has to take place pursuant to proper procedures and evidentiary standards, which you'll notice is actually quite similar to one of the universal declarations, one of the provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The other thing is that there has to be a finding of dangerousness either to oneself or others. Okay, so dangerousness. Well, people get locked up for crimes, but they can't get locked up ahead of time because the authorities think they're going to commit a crime. And so how is it possible that it can be constitutional to deprive someone of their liberty, to lock them up because of a prediction that they're going to commit harm either to themselves or others? I mean, it's not even illegal to commit suicide in most states, so that's not really a crime. So why is that? And so I think that's really an important issue. I mean, I just think on a fundamental level, it's pretty hard to get past that and say, why should that even be allowed? And the U.S. Supreme Court has said, well, you can't do that unless that proof of dangerousness is coupled with, quote, mental illness, some defect like that. And so that's how they why they say it's constitutional. But it's pretty unclear to me why that should be so. But anyway, that is the U.S. constitutional law. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I basically feel that probably less than 10% of the people that get locked up, get involuntarily committed, actually meet the criteria. For one thing, in order to be locked up, the U.S. Supreme Court has said you have to be proven to be dangerous by what's called clear and convincing evidence. And it's not quite beyond a reasonable doubt like in the criminal context, but it's more than preponderance of the evidence, which just means the scales tip slightly. So you've got to have really good proof that the person's going to be dangerous to himself or others. Well, you look at the studies, and psychiatrists can't predict when someone's going to be dangerous. I mean, you look at the studies, and unless these really rigorously tested instruments are used, psychiatrists are awful at it. I mean, they just over predict. And the best that can be done is if you rigorously use these instruments, you can achieve a 50% reliability. Well, that's not clear and convincing. So how is it that this happens? And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. And then in this other case, Cooper versus Oklahoma, the Supreme Court said, well, if you're incapable of surviving safely in freedom, then that's sufficient danger to yourself that you can be locked up. Now, surviving, I mean, in my mind, that means you're going to die, right? And actually, there are a couple of different ways that they express it. One is unable to live outside of a controlled environment. But basically, it's supposed to be a very clear proof that the person's going to be dangerous, and that dangerousness has some immediacy. That not all the courts say that it has to be imminent, But you can't say, well, I think sometime in the next 20 years a person is going to go out and kill someone and then lock them up for that. Okay, so that's the constitutional setting for involuntary commitment, which actually I consider it psychiatric imprisonment, basically. I mean, because that's really what it is. Okay, and then for forced drugging, I'm going to try not to read this whole thing, but you can, if you download it on the internet. But basically, the Supreme Court has as much as held that involuntary medication, which is basically forcing someone to ingest something that is going to change their mind, and of course we also know cause quite a bit of damage physically, that the government has to come in and show there's a really important reason for that. Okay, and one is the police power to protect, but mainly in the civil context they say, oh, it's in the person's best interest. Okay, so in other words, this person is incompetent to decide that they should take the drugs, and basically I've had psychiatrists testify, if they don't agree to take the drugs, that ipso facto shows that they're incompetent. I had a psychiatrist testify to that in a deposition, and when I pointed that out to the judge, she basically didn't care. So that's what we have. But and so they've got to prove that. So they've got to have an interest in the criminal context, which is where this case came from, United States versus Cell. They want to drug someone in order to make them, quote, competent to stand trial. And people have probably heard of the Loeffner case, the man who shot Gabby Giffords. And so there was a big fight over whether they could drug him to make him competent to stand trial. And it was very interesting to me is their description of why he was competent to stand. The drugs had made, they finally lost on the issue of competence to stand trial, and he was forcibly drugged. And the evidence they cited for how it worked was that he was able to sit in a courtroom for 7 hours without basically doing anything, as opposed to the previous time he was kind of disruptive. So that's their idea of competence, which is basically not to be a disruption in the courtroom. The legal criteria is the ability to understand the charges against you and to assist your counsel. But so this is one of the areas where it's a big fiction as to what exactly is the government interest and whether or not the interest is being furthered by the forced drugging. The other one is that it's necessary to further those interests. Okay, so I didn't really use it on the last slide, but also this in the involuntary commitment arena, the question is, the point is you can't lock someone up if there's a less restrictive alternative. And in this context, it means you can't drug someone against their will if there's a less intrusive alternative. Okay? Well, this whole group is about a less intrusive alternative, right? And so if, for example, the hospital wants to drug someone against their will, and they can point and say, Dr. Emerson, he'll treat me without medication, then really they have the constitutional right to that. Okay, it's also got to be medically appropriate. In other words, it's got to be in the person's best interest, and it's got to, and you got to look at all the, the effects and all that, and the specific drug really matters. Okay, so that's the constitutional framework for drugging someone against their will. Now, as Nancy said, we've taken a look at what's going on with drugging children, and what happens is, I'm going to jump ahead of myself again, but basically, poor children on Medicaid are given psychiatric drugs, especially neuroleptics, at a rate of 9 times more often than children not on Medicaid. And children in foster care are given psychiatric drugs, neuroleptics, 4 times more often than the rest of, the total population of children in Medicaid. Okay, so what are children's rights here? Well, there's this case, DeShaney versus Winnebago County, which is considered to be a really awful case by the U.S. Supreme Court, where they held that the state was not liable when they released a child to a father who was known to be abusive and then, really hurt his daughter. And they said, well, the state doesn't really have any duty at that point once they release, not to release someone into a harmful environment, which, is, I think, rightly considered an awful decision. But they did basically say, while you're in state custody, the state has the obligation to take care of you and not harm you. And I think that is a important principle with which the rights of children not to be harmed by these drugs can be used. Okay, so that's kind of the legal setting. And I was really pleased as I listened, went to presentations and earlier in this conference at how much I think people really understand how harmful the drugs are, and maybe I won't go through them quite as much as I otherwise would. But I think it's clear that they're creating a massive amount of harm. I mean, they're even reducing the lifespans by 25 years of people diagnosed with serious mental illness in the public system. And Bert, yesterday you said, I think 15 to 25 years. I think it's pretty clear that it's 25 years. And to me, the fact that society doesn't really care about that really shows how little this group of people is cared about by society. I mean, the fact that people are dying so young is basically not an unacceptable outcome for society at large. It's okay that these people get out of the way. In fact, I would suggest that the entire involuntary system, involuntary commitment, and forced drugging is basically to get troublesome people out of the way. I'll back up a little bit. There's Dr. David Healy. Do people know who he is from Wales, I think it is? He literally wrote the book, The History of Psychopharmacology. And he did a study in Wales around 1900 of patients in that area. And basically, people in the insane asylums at that period lived normal lives. Okay. Then with the first generation of neuroleptics, the lifespans became about 10 to 15 years shorter than the general population. And now they're basically 25 years. And I think the reason for the increase from 10 to 15 to 25 is both that the second generation neuroleptics, I don't like to call them antipsychotics, really are far more physically harmful than the first generation. I mean, the drug companies just straight out lied about them. And shame on psychiatry for just adopting them wholesale without any kind of critical analysis of that. And so that's one piece of it. And then the other piece of it is the practice of polypharmacy now, where people are given 2, 3, 4. You'd see people on a dozen different psychotropic drugs now, and those are physically harmful in combination. I mean, there's been no studies. Nobody really knows what they have, and I think it's probably almost impossible, if not impossible, to determine all the interactions with all the different possibilities of the drugs and the way different people react. But the result is very clear that people are dying quite a bit earlier than the rest of the population on these drugs. Okay, it's also hugely and unnecessarily expensive. It's at least cutting the recovery rate in half, and so you have all these people that are not getting better, who would otherwise get better, and are burdens on the public treasury, and that's in addition to the treatment. I mean, so they're being wards of the state basically, or their lives are supported financially by the state, and that's really expensive. they're cutting the recovery rate at least in half, and you could suggest even more than that. And as Robert Whitaker goes through an anatomy of an epidemic, the disability rate of people on where their disability is based on a diagnosis of mental illness has increased 6 times since the introduction of the so-called miracle drug Thorazine in 1954. And I don't think all of it is the drugs. I mean, I think the welfare to work, where people kind of have to get certified as disabled to stay on the rolls, has some impact. But it's very clear that a very big part of this increase in the disability rate is the drugs. And if you haven't read Anatomy of an Epidemic, I really heartily recommend it. And then, there's this minor detail that these drugs are inflicting enormous and unnecessary harm on people. And they for people that, especially that are drugged against their will, it's life ruining. I mean, when I look at a forced drugging case, I kind of look at it as a death case, a death penalty case. And there's kind of this idea in the psychiatric survivor community called social death, that once you get put in the mental health system, that you experience social death. But in reality, when you're dying 25 years earlier, and some people die, right off the bat with neuroleptic malignant syndrome and all that, that I consider a death penalty. So I'm not going to go through that much of the studies, but I think this one is this graph, and I have to give credit to Robert Whitaker for this, is that he did this 15-year study of patients on and off neuroleptics, and basically 40% who were not on the neuroleptics recovered versus 5 who were on the neuroleptics. And when I just kind of came this morning, when I was thinking about now why do we only get a 40% recovery rate in this study, whereas in the open dialogue approach they're seeing an 80% recovery rate. And what I kind of came up with as a hypothesis is these were patients who had been on the drugs, and it was a study of patients who got off the drugs, and you had a 40% recovery rate versus a 5% recovery rate, where I think the evidence is pretty clear that if we can keep people from going down that path of getting put on neuroleptics, that we can see 80%, pretty close to 80% of the people do not need to become chronic. They just go through what they go through. Paris Williams, who gave a presentation earlier today, has a really terrific new book out called Rethinking Madness. Are you here, Paris? Anyway, and he's got a really interesting way of looking at it. But the basic thing is, and a lot of psychiatric survivors will tell you the same thing, is that psychosis is kind of a process of there's things going on that have happened to you, and you're going through things, and you need to go through that, and it may be painful, but to the extent that the drugs stop you from going through that process, that it's a very unhelpful thing. Okay, so psychotropic drugs, children and youth. There's a book. Are people familiar with Sharna Olfman? She's got the Childhood in America series. Anyway, she edits these books. I actually have a chapter in this book. And there's this marvelous program, and I heartily recommend this book too, even except for my chapter, of course. And has anybody heard of the criticalthinkrx.org curriculum? Okay, so I'll talk about it a little bit. The basic facts are that 1 in 7 children or youth are on some kind of psychotropic drugs. I mean, this is an extraordinarily high number. I mean, what is going on? To the stimulants, there's no long-term benefit. I think, and a lot of people think, that the short-term benefit is basically for the adults and children's lives, is that it makes them more controllable. I ran into someone I went to grade school with in an airport a few years ago, and she's a school psychologist now. And she told me what she's doing. She says, well, you know, I'm one of these people that recommend children get given drugs. And I said, well, how can you do that with all this harm that goes on? And she said, well, the class sizes are too big, and the teachers can't control the students with, you know, with such big classes. And I said, well, how can you justify harming children for this reason? And she said, well, the class sizes are too big, you know. So that was her answer. Well, the antidepressants really are causing this massive epidemic in the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, because a certain percentage of people given antidepressants and the stimulants, for that matter, have a manic reaction. And I don't know how many people, if any of you say it, but we hear it all the time. Oh, we've unmasked your bipolar disorder. I mean, how idiotic is that? And so rather than withdraw the drug and see what happens, they get diagnosed with bipolar disorder and put on that path, and given those drugs and put on that path. And there have been studies that show this, especially Joseph Glenmullen, people think that the double-blind, randomized, controlled trial is, you know, the gold standard of study or evidence. And I'm going to talk about it in a little bit, but there's this great book by David Healy again called Pharmageddon, where he goes through why that's not really the case. But what Glenmullen did is he did what's called a challenge, de-challenge, re-challenge, where someone becomes manic and you take the drug away and they stop being manic, and you give the drug back to them and they become manic again. That's pretty good evidence that it's causing it. Okay? Better than the way that you can really manipulate these randomized controlled trials. And I'll just give you a thought about that, is that people think that having thousands of people in a study is better than having a few people in a study. And maybe to come up with harms and stuff, that's right. But basically, for efficacy, if it takes you with 10,000 subjects to come up with a little bit of, enough to be statistically evident, or statistically significant, that's not really that robust. But if you have 10 and 9 of them get, really see a big improvement, then that's a lot better, actually. Okay, so 23% of boys given antidepressants became manic. Okay, this is an extraordinary rate. And that's, we've had this 40-fold increase in the rate of bipolar diagnosis in the last 15 years because of Joseph Biederman, basically. And this is a big reason for it. And we now have a little over 1% of children and youth on neuroleptics. Even some 6-month-old babies are on neuroleptics. Now, you tell me what a psychotic infant looks like. We used to have another word for it, colic.
Yeah.
Really, it's all. I just think it's abhorrent. And the result of all this is that we've had a disaster in the rate of, the drugging of children, and the disability rate has gone from essentially 0 to 600,000 5 years ago. Okay, so why is this happening? Okay, one is very clear, that the drug companies targeted children and youth. In fact, they also targeted the elderly, and they've targeted people in the involuntary system. And what is constant on all these? The people given these drugs don't get to say no, because when people get to say no, they say no in droves, especially to the neuroleptics. In the Katie study, I don't know if people are familiar with that. I think, Bert, you mentioned that, didn't you? It was designed to show that the second generation neuroleptics were better than the first generation, and that was what it was designed for. And what they found was actually there was no difference, including extrapyramidal symptoms. There's this myth that the new drugs don't cause tardive dyskinesia. It's not true. It's just a flat-out lie. Okay, but to me the most interesting part of the result of that study is that 75% of the people in that study quit the drugs because they were either intolerable or they didn't work, or both. Okay, and so instead, in order to sell these drugs, the drug companies have targeted children and youth who can't say no because the parents are convinced, or the authorities are convinced that they need to have them. Adults in the involuntary system, where they're told, where basically the reaction is, well, if this person weren't crazy, she'd know this was good for her, therefore we're going to make her do it. And the elderly, who also, especially in nursing homes, where these drugs have a black box warning that they double the mortality rate. So that's the drug companies, okay? And then there are financial incentives for other players in the system. The schools get extra money if the child is determined to be a special needs child, right? So they get more money. Foster parents get more money if it's a, quote, therapeutic foster home. Psychiatrists, obviously, make money on this regime. Okay, and the other thing, and this is especially true is mainly true for poor parents, is that they also don't really have the power to say no. I mean, poor parents are often told, if you don't give your child these drugs, we're going to throw your child out of school. And they do. And even worse than that, they're told, if you don't give your child this or that drug, we're going to take the child away from you because you're neglecting your child's medical needs. And they do take them away. And there's whole organizations, and society as a whole doesn't really recognize that this is going on. Okay. So here's a graph of what I said before about the disability rate of children since they really started being drugged heavily. Of course, before that, the stimulants were being given, but it's really the antidepressants and the neuroleptics that have caused this massive increase in disability. Okay, so the harms to children causing this massive rise in bipolar diagnosis. Physical ailments, I mean, we have 18-year-olds dying of heart attacks. The stimulants and all these drugs are hard on the cardiovascular system. And so you have some people just dropping dead at 18. I had a friend's son who was, I don't know, early 20s. He said he had this jock friend of his who just died, and he had been put on the drugs. I can't say for sure in that case, but it's not rare for children and youth to just be killed by these drugs. I mean, we've all heard, I think, of Rebecca Riley in Massachusetts, the 2-year-old that was put on Seroquel and was so drugged up by the time she was 4 that she just died from the effects of the Seroquel. But to me, in terms of the legal stuff, the interesting thing is the parents were put in jail, and the psychiatrist was given immunity for testifying against the parents, and she still has her license. And so that's kind of the state of affairs. So all these things, cognitive decline. All right. So that's kind of the situation in terms of the harm of these drugs. And now then, it's really important that we present alternatives to the drugging. And there really are many. I mean, that's what this group is all about. There have been presentations where the Hearing Voices Network has been talked about, Sotiri has been talked about, open dialogue. This may not be that welcome a thought for this group, but I think, maybe because I am a peer, but I think that peers in a lot of circumstances have a lot to offer, because there's just something about being able to connect on that personal level with a shared lived experience that can generate kind of a level of trust and understanding of the feeling that you've been there that is hard for therapists to do. I mean, when I go and meet people in the hospital or possibly to represent them, I'll mention that I was in the hospital for a month in 1982, and that, really helps with the relationship. Strategic therapy, I'm kind of a fan of Jay Haley. I'm not that that familiar. But Jay Haley and the idea that you've basically got a designated crazy person, and that person is really going crazy to try and heal the family, and to understand, really the kind of motivations behind that, and that one of the things, there's this gifted therapist in Alaska by the name of George Stone, who worked with Jay Haley, and one of the great things about the way he works is he finds a positive way to look at virtually every behavior as it's, someone sacrificing themselves or something like that. And I think that's really a good way to look at things. Okay, so there have been other presentations about this, which is the open dialogue approach. But basically, they're getting pretty close to 80% of people that have no symptoms 5 years out. And not two-thirds of them, but two-thirds of the 100% were never exposed to neuroleptics. Another third were given them at least occasionally during the 5 years, and only 20% use them constantly for the whole 5 years. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that there's 20% that use it, for the ongoing, and 80% that recover. And it's not 100% overlap, but it's pretty close to that. And so the drugs are just so debilitating. And I should say, though, however, that I know people that find the drugs helpful, and I think they should have access to them. I think they should be told the truth about them, including that there are these other types of approaches that help. But if they want to take them, that's fine. And actually, even if they don't know the truth about them, if they want to take them, I don't really have a beef. But my beef is about forcing people to take them when they say they don't want them, and then the response is, "Oh, you're crazy. You don't know that you should take them, and therefore we're going to make you take them." And I think one of the really good things when people want to take them, a lot of people really don't take them all the time. They can not take them for a long time, and then they kind of get into a situation that they're kind of getting out of control, and they decide, well, I need to do this to stop that. And that's a lot less harmful physically than being on it all the time. And I think most people that take them, really get to decide for themselves, end up on much smaller doses, which is also not nearly as physically harmful. So there are also many solutions for children and youth. Well, I really heartily recommend this criticalthinkrx.org website. It was financed by out of the settlement of the Narantan off-label marketing case, and it's designed for people that are involved in prescribing decisions for children. And it goes through all this evidence on the drugs with children, but also Module 8 has a whole listing, and it's got a bibliography. It's in a kind of PowerPoint format, but it's very rigorously and meticulously researched and cited. Basically, I would boil it down to just two things. Of course, I'm pretty simplistic. Is the two things that we need to do for children that are having problems like this are to help the parents be better parents, and help the children and youth be successful and deal with their problems. I mean, when you think about children in foster care, the reason why they're in foster care is that they've been subject to abuse or neglect. There's been a finding of that. Okay, so that's going to make them unhappy and act out. And then being yanked out from their homes is going to, no matter how bad their home might be, that's, probably going to be upsetting, or at least to a lot of people, although some kind of are pretty relieved. And then lots of times the foster placements are pretty horrific. And so instead of helping the child or youth deal with all that and become successful, we say there's something wrong with your brain and you need to take these drugs for the rest of your life. Basically, we need to quit using so many drugs. We need to quit forcing people. All right. So why is society taking such a, really such a counterproductive approach. And I think of it as fear and absolution. The fear is this violence myth that people diagnosed with serious mental illness are going to kill us in our beds if we don't lock them up and drug them. Okay, that's just simply not true. And then absolution is this idea, it's really comforting to people to say, oh, there's something wrong with your brain, because then that takes responsibility away, responsibility for the cause, and also responsibility for doing anything about it. Okay, and you just hand it over to the doctor, and then, you say, oh, it's my bipolar, made me do it. Or someone does something, you need to take your meds. Are you taking your meds? I mean, that's a common reaction. Other factors as well. So, in my mind, that raises the question: is what are the doctors doing in continuing this practice? Okay, 15 years ago, I think there was plausible deniability about all this. I mean, it's been hidden. But now we know 25% of the medical journal articles are ghostwritten. We know that the data is basically cooked. We know that, all this stuff about the drugs. So why is this practice continuing? And so that's why I really like this idea is, well, what is it? Is the doctor fooled or is the doctor complicit? And I think as a society, we grant monopoly prescribing privileges to doctors on the basis that they are going to objectively look at the evidence and make prescribing recommendations based on that. And we give them that trust, and they betray that trust in the way that the current system operates. So, as I said, I don't think more than 10% of the involuntary commitments meet legal criteria. I don't think that forced drugging can ever meet the constitutional requirement that it be shown to be in the person's best interest and there's no less intrusive alternative. Violations of the Universal Declaration of Rights is rampant. In addition to being pretty critical about the doctors or other prescribers, I'm very critical of the lawyers who basically take the attitude, if my client wasn't crazy, she'd know this was good for her, therefore I'm not going to let her pesky little legal rights get in the way of that. Well, that's a broken legal system, because that's not their job. It's the job of the state to prove they're entitled to drug the person, and it's up to the lawyer. It's the lawyer's job to make the state prove that beyond, by clear and convincing evidence. Okay, I even wrote a law review article about this involuntary commitment and forced psychiatric drugging in the trial courts, rights violations as a matter of course. And it's about, I specifically look at Alaska law, but basically it's pretty applicable throughout the United States. Another interesting thing, when I talked about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I said torture is prohibited. Well, the special rapporteur for the United Nations issued this report that basically said forced drugging can constitute torture, legally constitute torture under the rules. And I would recommend this book, Brain Disabling Treatment in Psychiatry by Dr. Bregan. I think it gives support for the idea that, why it can be torture. So I think it's really important for this group of people to get out and spread the word. And I think it's really important really to promote and work in beneficial programs. And I think it's really important to refuse to participate in harmful program and practices. I mean, everybody has financial demands, paycheck and all that. But really, is it really justified to really be doing this harm to people? It's really important. I think we've got this massive group of people who want to withdraw from the drugs, and they need help with that. Dr. Bregan, I'm in the middle of his new book, Withdrawing from Psychiatric Drugs, and I think that it's a pretty important book. I think over the decades, Dr. Bregan has really tended to be the first one to point out various things, and this is something that is really starting to, people should become aware of, is there's this massive group of people that want to get off the psychiatric drugs, and they should be given help. I mentioned before, engage in public education. I think really helping people escape from psychiatric fours is something that this group of people can do. You can do it through court testimony. People are willing to be go into court and testify on behalf of defendants. That would be a good thing. And prosecute Medicaid fraud cases. So that's pretty much it.